What is your connection to the Listowel Mutineers of June 1920?
My connection to the Listowel Mutineers is through Constable Jeremiah Mee, who was my grandfather.
How well did you know your grandfather?
Well, unfortunately, both my grandfather and my grandmother died before any of their grandchildren were born. But we did learn a great deal about both of them from my father, my uncle, and my aunts, including his last surviving child, my Aunt Teresa. And of course, we also picked up a lot from uh, personal photographs, personal letters, and other family memorabilia that we have.
What kind of man was your grandfather?
At heart, Grandpa was a devoted family man. Uh, he was quite serious minded too, with a very strong sense of personal values, of right and wrong, fairness and unfairness, and that stayed with him all of his life. Uh, Grandpa was a disciplinarian as well, but underneath that, he could be extremely compassionate and loving, even, especially towards family and friends. And while discipline was important to Grandpa, his approach to it was, in some ways, quite unconventional when you think about the era in which he lived. For example, he and Granny, as parents, were adamant that corporal punishment wouldn't happen in their household, and they stuck by that. Uh, Grandpa believed in discipline, there's no doubt about that, but he strangely didn't see corporal punishment as discipline. He saw it as indiscipline on the part of adults. So he was a man of very firm, fixed views on certain issues and subjects.
How did your grandfather come to write his famous memoirs?
Uh, well, that goes back to when the Bureau of Military History was set up, and Grandpa was asked as part of that to provide a witness statement. So he first began writing out of a sense of personal obligation. Later on, a writer friend of his from Sligo, Philip Rooney, encouraged Grandpa to produce a personal memoir. And Philip, he somehow seems to have also persuaded Grandpa to publish a set of articles for newspapers, which were later serialised in the Leitrim Leader and Reynolds News in the early 1950s.
Was the writing a difficult process for him?
Well, as far as the writing as a process went, it's important to remember that Grandpa Jerry was by and large a self-taught man. He also first started writing at his home in Lochagar in County Westmeath, in a house with no electricity and no running water. But Grandpa was a constant self-improver in everything he did, whether as a husband, a father, in his job, personal fitness, or whatever. So he researched his facts as carefully as he could, and he would constantly ask for feedback from Philip and also from his children, right down to individual sentences. And then he would do draft after redraft on his old typewriter. I ought to say as well that as far as the memoirs go, that the family doesn't think Grandpa ever intended to publish the memoirs himself, because he bequeathed them in his will along with the residue of his estate to his fourth child, my late Aunt Peggy. So I think it was in Grandpa's mind for Peggy to decide what to do with them, whether just to keep them within the family, hand them over to the public in some way, or whatever. Grandpa was very private generally.
How do you think your grandfather would feel about the town of Listowel commemorating the mutiny that took place there in 1920?
Oh, Grandpa would have been delighted and grateful for his friends and comrades who took part in the mutiny. Grandpa always had a very deep affection and admiration for those men. For himself, he would have been highly embarrassed, to say the least, but at the same time, he would have probably seen it as his duty to support Listowel in any way he could in marking the occasion. He did feel a great bond with the people of Listowel in the same way as he did with his native Glenamaddy in Galway, which was a very special place for him personally.
What would your grandfather make of today's Ireland?
Today's Ireland. I think that Grandpa would, if he was around today, he would be utterly amazed at the material and technological advances that Ireland has made since his time. I think he would have also been very struck by the amount of progress that women have achieved for themselves since his day, and also the more diverse and global nature of Irish identity. That would have fascinated him. On the downside, the amount of drug crime, the high cost of housing in certain parts of the country, and the level of homelessness would not sit well with Grandpa, especially when compared to the amount of wealth, particularly lavish wealth, that clearly exists in Ireland. As well as that, Grandpa definitely would not like the modern world's prevailing celebrity culture and love of celebrity gossip. He just wouldn't be able to stomach any of that. Remember, Grandpa was always at his best and most relaxed amongst very ordinary people. He didn't like attention seeking, and he placed very little stock in possessions or money or glamour. He valued simplicity and humility. But of course, his was a very different generation to now.